Have you ever wondered if time travel is just science fiction or if it could be something far more real than we ever imagined? What if I told you that over 1400 years ago, long before Einstein's theories of relativity, long before Hollywood blockbusters about bending time, the Qur'an revealed a story so extraordinary that it challenges everything we think we know about the nature of time itself? Deep within the pages of this ancient text lies an account that has puzzled scholars, amazed scientists, and left countless readers in absolute wonder. It's a story that doesn't just hint at the possibility of time manipulation, it describes it in vivid detail. We're talking about young men who closed their eyes in one era and opened them in another, having experienced what can only be described as divinely orchestrated time travel. If this already stirs something within you, comment 777 below, because what you're about to discover will reshape how you see time, destiny, and the incredible power that governs our universe. And to those of you who've been with us on this journey of exploration, your support means everything. Every like, every share, every thoughtful comment fuels our mission to uncover these hidden truths. But here's what makes this story absolutely mind-blowing. This isn't just ancient mythology or poetic metaphor. The details are precise, the implications are staggering, and the scientific parallels are undeniable. We're about to dive into the story of Ashab al-Kahf, the sleepers of the cave, and discover how their experience reveals secrets about time that modern physics is only beginning to understand. Are you ready to journey into a realm where divine intervention meets the fabric of time itself? Where faith and physics collide in the most unexpected ways? Stay with us, because what we're about to uncover isn't just a story from the past. It's a revelation that speaks directly to questions humanity has been asking for millennia. The story begins in an age of darkness, in an empire where tyranny ruled with an iron fist. Picture a time when believing in one God could cost you your life, when young people faced impossible choices between their faith and their very survival. It was during the reign of a ruthless emperor, one whose name history remembers with dread, that our story unfolds. 7 young men, pure of heart and unwavering in their belief, found themselves trapped in a world that had turned hostile to everything they held sacred. These weren't ordinary youth caught up in political rebellion or social unrest. These were individuals whose souls burned with divine truth, whose hearts refused to bow before false idols no matter the consequence. Can you imagine the courage it took? Standing firm in your beliefs when the entire machinery of empire is designed to crush you, when conformity means life and resistance means death. But these young men had something more powerful than fear, something that would soon manifest in ways they never could have imagined. The Qur'an tells us in Surah al-Kahf that when persecution became unbearable, when their very lives hung in the balance, they made a decision that would echo through eternity. They fled to a cave, seeking refuge not just from human oppression, but placing their complete trust in divine protection. Little did they know they were about to become participants in one of the most extraordinary demonstrations of God's power over time itself. As they entered that cave, exhausted from their journey, hearts heavy with the weight of leaving everything behind, they offered a prayer that would be answered in the most incredible way imaginable. "Our Lord," they said, "grant us mercy from yourself, and prepare for us from our affair right guidance." What happened next defies every natural law we understand about consciousness, aging, and the passage of time. As sleep overcame them, something miraculous began. This wasn't ordinary rest, or even hibernation as some might suggest. This was a divine suspension of time's grip on their mortal bodies. The Qur'an describes how God cast upon them a deep sleep, but the Arabic word used here, daraba, suggests something far more profound than mere slumber. It indicates a divine striking, a supernatural intervention that placed them in a state between life and death, between one moment and eternity. And here's where the story becomes absolutely fascinating from a scientific perspective. While they slept, their bodies didn't decay. They didn't age. They remained perfectly preserved, as if time itself had stopped flowing around them. Even their clothing remained intact, their appearances unchanged. How is this possible unless time operates differently than we assume? Modern physics tells us that time isn't constant, that it can be affected by gravity, speed, and other forces. Einstein showed us that time is relative, that it can slow down or speed up depending on conditions. Could it be that this cave became a pocket where divine power manipulated the very fabric of space-time? But the miracle goes even deeper. The Qur'an mentions that God caused the sun to decline from their cave when it rose and when it set, protecting them from its rays. Some interpreters suggest this indicates the cave's unique position, while others see it as evidence of divine intervention in the natural order itself. Think about this for a moment. If you were to stumble upon 7 perfectly preserved young men in a cave, wouldn't you assume they had died recently? Wouldn't every natural instinct tell you that such preservation was impossible after any significant passage of time? Yet these young men had been sleeping not for days or months, but for centuries. The number varies in different traditions. Some say 309 years, others suggest different time frames. But what remains consistent is the staggering reality that they experienced what can only be described as time travel. They went to sleep in one world and awakened in another, having skipped across centuries as if they were merely hours. When they finally stirred from their miraculous slumber, they had no idea that the world around them had completely transformed. Empires had risen and fallen, languages had evolved, entire civilizations had come and gone, and yet to them, it felt as though they had merely taken an afternoon nap. One of them, feeling hungry, reached for the silver coins they had brought with them, coins that bore the image of the emperor they had fled from. He offered to go into the city to buy food, completely unaware that the city he remembered, the people he knew, the entire world he had left behind, had become ancient history. Imagine the shock, the absolute bewilderment, when this young man walked into what he thought was his familiar marketplace. The coins he carried, silver pieces that should have been accepted without question, were now viewed as ancient relics. The shopkeeper stared at them with confusion, perhaps wonder, recognizing the inscriptions of an emperor whose reign had become legend. The faces around him were completely foreign. The language, while similar, had evolved in ways that made communication difficult. The buildings, the customs, even the way people dressed, everything had changed. It was as if he had stepped into an alien world, and in many ways, he had. Word spread quickly through the city. Who was this young man with ancient coins? How could someone so young possess artifacts from centuries past? The authorities were called, scholars were summoned, and soon the impossible truth began to emerge. This wasn't some clever forgery or elaborate deception. This was something that defied every natural law they understood. When the young man returned to the cave, confused and frightened by what he had witnessed, his companions awakened fully. Together, they began to piece together the magnitude of what had occurred. They had been transported through time itself, carried across centuries by divine power in what could only be described as the ultimate demonstration of God's sovereignty over creation. But here's what makes this story even more remarkable. The Qur'an doesn't present this as mythology or allegory. It's described with the same matter-of-fact tone used for historical events. The details are precise, the implications are clear, and the message is unmistakable. Time, which we consider one of the most fundamental constants of existence, is completely subject to divine will. Modern scientists struggle to understand time travel, creating complex theories about wormholes, time loops, and paradoxes. They debate whether traveling to the past is possible, whether causality can be violated, whether the universe would permit such interventions. Yet here, in this ancient text, we find a clear example of divine time manipulation that required no technology, no exotic matter, no cosmic phenomena beyond the will of the Creator. Think about the precision required for such an intervention. Not only did God preserve their bodies perfectly across centuries, but He orchestrated their awakening at exactly the right moment. It wasn't random chance that brought them back to consciousness. It was divine timing, a moment chosen with perfect knowledge of past, present, and future. The story reveals something profound about the nature of miracles themselves. This wasn't just a suspension of natural law for its own sake. It served multiple purposes. It preserved these faithful young men from persecution. It provided a sign for future generations about God's power over time, and it offered hope to anyone facing seemingly impossible circumstances. Consider the theological implications. If God can manipulate time so effortlessly, what does this tell us about prophecy, about destiny, about the nature of divine knowledge itself? The Qur'an tells us that God knows what was, what is, and what will be. But this story suggests something even more profound, that God doesn't just know the future. He can rearrange time itself to accomplish His purposes. The young men's experience also raises fascinating questions about consciousness and identity. When they awakened, they were still themselves, with memories intact, personalities unchanged. Their souls had traveled through time while remaining perfectly preserved. This suggests that consciousness itself might exist outside the normal flow of temporal experience. Some scholars have pointed to parallels with modern scientific concepts. Could the cave have experienced time dilation similar to what Einstein described near massive gravitational fields? Could divine power have created conditions that allowed time to pass differently inside the cave compared to the outside world? While we can't know the exact mechanism, the result described in the Qur'an aligns remarkably with theoretical physics concepts that wouldn't be discovered for over a millennium. The story also carries a powerful message about trust and surrender. These young men didn't seek to become time travelers. They simply sought refuge and placed their trust in divine protection. Their extraordinary experience came not from pursuing the miraculous, but from genuine faith and complete reliance on God's mercy. When their story became known throughout the land, it served as undeniable proof of divine power. No one could explain away their preservation, their ancient coins, their knowledge of a bygone era. It was a miracle that spoke to educated and uneducated alike, to believers and skeptics, to rulers and common people. But perhaps most remarkably, their story was preserved not just in local legend, but in the Qur'an itself, ensuring that this demonstration of God's power over time would be remembered and pondered by countless generations. Every time someone reads their story, they're confronted with the same profound questions about the nature of time, divine power, and human destiny. The implications extend far beyond the historical event itself. If God demonstrated such complete mastery over time for these 7 young men, what other interventions in temporal flow might have occurred throughout history? How many moments that we consider fixed points in time might actually be subject to divine revision? Points in time might actually be subject to divine revision. The story of the sleepers of the cave stands as one of the most profound demonstrations that time itself bows before divine will. These 7 young men didn't just experience a miracle. They became living proof that the boundaries we consider absolute are merely suggestions to the one who created them. Their journey through centuries reminds us that faith can transcend not just persecution, but the very fabric of reality itself. What seemed impossible to ancient minds and remains mysterious to modern science was accomplished through simple trust in divine power. If this revelation has stirred something within your soul, share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. And remember that the same God who bent time for 7 faithful hearts is still writing miracles today. Miracles today.